Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. This podcast is designed for the adult medical speech-language pathologist. Most of our audience members work in settings such as acute care hospitals, private practice, outpatient hospital clinics, and inpatient rehabilitation hospitals. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. The content of this course is based on the research and experience of the presenters. The listener is responsible for researching to determine if the information and skills taught are appropriate for their clients, students, or patients. SpeechTherapyPD.com does not necessarily endorse, recommend, or favor the information shared, nor any of the claims, opinions, statements, offers, or services made by the presenter.
Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Renee Garrett and I'm your SpeechTherapyPD.com podcast host for Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. Before we get started, we have a few items to alert you to. Here are the financial and non-financial disclosures. Joining us today is Sonya Floyd. Her financial disclosure is that she receives compensation for this presentation from SpeechTherapyPD.com, and she has no relevant non-financial relationships to disclose. The disclosure statement for myself is that I'm a paid employee of a private consulting firm in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and as the host of Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs, and other webinars on SpeechTherapyPD.com, I do receive financial compensation. I'm also an adjunct faculty member for both James Madison University and Old Dominion University. My non-financial disclosure is that I am the secretary for the Communication Disorders Foundation of Virginia. Now, without further ado, we welcome our guest, Sonya Floyd. Sonya completed her BS in Education of Communication Disorders at Georgia Southern University Armstrong campus, formerly Armstrong Atlantic State University, and her MED in Communication Disorders at Valdosta State University. Sonya specializes in adult swallowing and swallowing disorders. She currently holds a certificate of clinical competency with the American Speech Language Hearing Association and is licensed to practice in the state of Georgia. Mrs. Floyd has practiced in a variety of settings, including outpatient, home health, acute care, swing bed, and skilled nursing facilities throughout her career. Sonya has trained in several areas to include myofascial release and FEES, and currently provides mobile fiber optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing, FEES, full-time. She's the immediate past president of the Georgia Speech Language Hearing Association and the recipient of the Georgia Speech Language Hearing Association Jack Best Memorial Award. Thank you, Sonya, for being here, and thank you for that wonderful intro. I had no idea that you got an award. You didn't tell me that.
Oh, yeah. I actually had a few, but try to keep your resume a little clear and concise. So try not to add everything on there.
So it's been a while since, I know we just chatted recently, but you've changed jobs. So kind of tell me a little bit about that, since it's not, are you still you're doing your mobile feast on the side too though, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Still mobile fees. So I recently, I guess just about a year now, I've started working with Collage Home and Community Rehabilitation. So came over, started working with Collage. Our focus is on those who primarily have brain injuries, and most of them are acquired through traumatic brain injuries. So that's been the focus that I've been, kind of moving in that direction for the past year. It's been an enjoyable ride. And I've enjoyed switching it up a little bit, doing something a little different. After being in our field for almost 20 years, get a little stagnant, We want to shake things up a little bit. And this has been a breath of fresh air to kind of delve into something a little bit different.
So how exactly does this company make a difference with brain injury patients? Because I know you're serving more than one state at this point, right? Like the tri-state?
Correct. So our division is primarily responsible for Georgia and South Carolina, but we are expanding into North Carolina. Our community-based program, that is, our inpatient programs that we have are currently in all 3 states. So we're just expanding the home and community side to offer those services once they move out of that, subacute rehab facility and they do transition back home and they're looking to return to work, etc. So for me, it's been really good seeing the transition of the patients, how we're moving forward with them, how we're making an impact is being able to provide the services and meet the patients where they are with their current needs. A lot of times patients discharge and it's like, okay, what do I do next? I'm going home, have my family members, but what does that look like? Maybe it's a workers' comp patient and they haven't been released to go back to work yet, or maybe they're not able to go back to work, So what do those next steps look like to get them reintegrated into home? How do we help get them back to, or as close to, where they can do the activities that they used to? How do we help them find new hobbies and interests? And that's where we come in and we help them, gain functionality. We help them with modifications. We help work through pain management and just that almost like conflict resolution within yourself, trying to find that new way of life after a brain injury. And that's our focus. That's how we make the impact for those folks, is being able to deliver the services in the environment in which they're comfortable and being able to do it efficiently and effectively.
And so you're more in the role of case management now?
Correct.
Are you still, okay.
But I do also provide services as a speech pathologist. So if we have patients that are in my area, I do go out and see them as well. But my primary role is case management. So as case manager, I'm overseeing, the team, that interdisciplinary team that we have. So that may be physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, social work, recreational therapy. So it really just depends on what the patients need. We often have a multidisciplinary approach, but sometimes it may be just that they need a single discipline. Like we've had several PT only cases. We've had a few cases that have been presented to us that are speech only. So again, it's dependent upon what the patient needs, where they're located. Do we have a team there, or can we assemble a team or shift teams to meet the needs of the community that we're trying to serve?
Yeah, and I think the thing that really interested me so much about this was just knowing that coming from, my original job coming fresh out of school was inpatient rehab. And I remember how difficult it was for those patients. And this was, 15 years ago, 14 years ago. So it was so difficult for them to get back into their communities, whatever that looked like, because insurance, because next level of care, their level of assistance required at home, if they were even able to go home or had a home, which I think is a great point, because some of the cases that we had up on our LTAC floor were workman's comp who were, it's different now. It's different now insurance wise than it was then, but they had to wait until things were settled with the workman's comp cases, and a lot of times before they could move on to the next step. I don't know how much that's changed because I haven't been working in that realm for a long time. But is that still about the same? Like the workman's case stuff has to be, or workman's comp cases have to be somewhat settled or close to being settled?
No, actually it doesn't, because again, we know that early intervention is best. So those patients being able to get earlier access to the services is only going to help speed up their recovery process and help them to be more functional a lot quicker. So what we actually do is we collaborate with those workers' comp case managers as the case manager for Collage home and community rehabilitation, I would be the person who would be the direct point of contact for that case manager. So, we work with those patients to get them attaining the goals that they haven't set forth. So it may be that someone's trying to return home, but they have physical limitations. Like we recently had a referral with a patient who had a multi-level home, lived by herself, and did not have any outside resources, but had sustained an injury with the bedrooms on the home being on the second floor and they weren't accessible. So that patient was unable to return home immediately, but we were able to get in, provide some intervention, and do a home assessment and see, is this patient able to return home? Because we know that being in your natural environment helps you thrive. So the longer you're displaced, then we start to tackle with other issues. We're starting to deal with depression. We're starting to deal with that separation anxiety from, just your normal routine of things. And then trying to get you back into your customary role of what you do every day. So being able to come in and work with folks who are dealing with that is really a great benefit to our services because we're able to do that. We're able to meet you where you are and help you get to where you want to be. We not only provide services in the home, so we are not a home health model, not to be confused. We provide very intensive therapy. Typically, our patients will get 6 hours a week or more per discipline. And it varies based on, need, but that's not average of what our patients would typically see is about 6 hours per discipline. And then we adjust it as needed because social work may not need as much and physical therapy may need a little bit more. So if that's the case, then we adjust those hours so that we can make sure the patient is getting what they need in order to meet their personal goals and help them get to a place where they can start sustaining themselves.
Is that 6 hours a week or 6 hours per
week.
episode?
No.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I said very intensive therapy. We're going out in the community with these folks. So if their hobbies are golf or if they are, bowling or whatever it is, we are going with you to see, are you able to currently do this? What is your balance like when you're doing these activities? Are you able to cognitively process and sequence the steps that are necessary to complete this task safely? What is your ability in terms of you being able to navigate to and from the facilities from where you're located, whether you're home or you're in a different facility and displaced temporarily? What does that look like? So those are the types of things that we're doing. Everything is very functional. It's a different outlook from what you typically would have with a home health or even an outpatient model. It's going to be a different mindset.
Yeah, it almost sounds like the patients might get what they actually need, which is almost unheard of, right?
When you talk about patient-centered and patient-driven goals, This is the epitome of that, because that is what we're doing every day with our patients in and out. What is your goal? What do you want to be able to do? What are you having difficulty with? How can we put in place measures that align with your goals to help you achieve them safely and efficiently? How do we get you back to work as quickly as possible?
Yeah, and the interesting part about that is before I was at the job I'm at now, I came from outpatient. And so a lot of times we hear that, but when I know for me, I worked with medically complex and most of the progressive neurological disease cases. So that is a little bit different, but some of the physical therapy goals, they were able to customize it that way because most of their patients in an ortho-based clinic were cognitively intact. So they were when you said golf, I kind of laughed a little because one of my community members that lives in my community, that he had to have a hip replacement or hip revision of a prior replacement. And that was one of his goals, was to be able to go back and play golf. And he's in his 80s. So, but he's very physically active, very, owned a business. So he I don't even think he retired until probably like 5 years ago. but also he works part-time at a wine shop locally, and he wanted to be able to provide a customer service of carrying a case or half a case of wine to the customer's car. And so he weighed it. He knew exactly how much it weighed, what kind of movements he would need to make. And so I think that's a really, for him, that's what he wanted. So I think that's great when we're thinking about our patients with acquired brain injury that's already a traumatic enough event. The length of stay can vary so much in acute care depending on the injury. And then, by the time they're able to go back home, they might have been in a couple of other steps of rehab prior to getting there. So I think it sounds like a really great model.
Oh, yeah.
What is the insurance coverage requirement? Is it private pay or is it private insurance? Is it more like Medicaid, Medicare?
No, so we actually offer the service to multiple insurance providers. So workers' comp is a big part of it. In South Carolina, we work with DDSN, Department of Disability Services and Special Needs. We also work with private insurance. So if you have a, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna policy, we can look at it. We do have some agreements already in place, but a lot of times we can do single case agreements as well. So it's very patient specific, depending on their injury, not just, we have a contract with them in general. So those are some of the other options that we have. And then we also have private pay, for those that can afford that. But like I said, the model looks different. So you won't see us, billing Medicaid or Medicare because the model looks different, the reimbursement is different. And so those are not insurances that would pay for the service.
Do you all meet as a team, like on a set schedule, or I guess it's a twofold question. Do you meet as a team, one, and two, is the patient or client included in that team?
Yes, absolutely. So we do quarterly meetings as a whole, as a group. So when I say quarterly meetings, we're talking about all speech therapists, all physical therapists, all occupational therapists, all social work, whoever is a part of that. So for each discipline, there's discipline specific quarterly meetings that we have. And we kind of go over, what's going on within our association, how are we doing? So we're talking about that tri-state region, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. Then once we have a patient on caseload and we're working a case, as a case manager, I run weekly case meetings with the team. And I talk to them, pretty consistently on a daily basis as well. And then we also do meetings with the family, patient, and if they have a case manager or a worker, and we do those at least every 4 weeks. But obviously, if we need to do them more, then we do them more frequently. But at a minimum, we try to do them every 4 weeks.
Wow, that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and as the case manager, I usually check in with them, 2 to 3 times a week, depending on the patient, the case, how involved it is, how much assistance they may need, or, how often I need to kind of check in with them and see how things are going. And that communication looks different for everybody. Some people prefer just to have a text and it's a very quick exchange. Some people, I get on the phone, we have, a little bit lengthier conversation. So it's really catered to what the patients and their families need.
Yeah, you got me thinking. I get quiet when I'm thinking. So when are we bringing this to Virginia?
Well, you know what? We are actually already in Virginia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So we're in Virginia. We're in New Jersey, Pennsylvania. So that's our East Coast. We've got Texas, Louisiana, Colorado, Utah, and California. Texas, Colorado, and California are some of our larger that we cover. But we definitely already have services in Virginia.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I'll have to look at that. How much do you, and I don't know, this may be really off topic and off just how my brain works. How do you know how long, and if they, like this company had to really lobby for services, as far as, because being on the state board in the past, how difficult and how long things take to pass legislation and to be able to offer a community support program like that, that's not necessarily a community service board based situation. Do you know if that was the case and how the history of how things got started?
So Collage Rehabilitation Partners has been around since 1984. So it's been around for a long time. So like I was saying, with Colorado, with California and Texas, there are more veteran programs.
Gotcha.
Other states being ones that we've reintegrated to with our home and community program more recently. Georgia was within the last year, like I was saying. I think we're going on closer to like a year and a half when you start looking at it on paper. But Georgia is definitely one of our babies, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. But yeah, the company as a whole has been around for many years. As far as lobbying and, integration of services within the communities, I don't really know that it's been a difficult process for us. I mean, I imagine that it's probably been just as difficult as it is for anything else when you're talking about rehab, with being able to get access to the services. A big part of what we do is educate. We're talking to case managers in hospitals, we're talking to them in subacute facilities, we are going to step down units, we're going to private institutions, just trying to raise awareness that there are other options out there for your patients when they discharge. It's not just they go home, they go to home health, they go to outpatient. Like, there's a step in between that we're missing that can be very functional and purposeful for these patients, because a lot of times what we hear is that there's a gap in the services and there's disparity because home health only does so much and they only go so far, and they're not taking people out in the community. When I say we go out in the community with our patients, I had a patient's family member that I spoke to last week, and she was like, okay, I know we're working on a gym program and we're doing this, but he doesn't drive. So, how do I get him there? I'm like, don't worry about it. We're going to come and we're going to get him. We're going to take him to the gym. We're going to set the program up, and we're done. We'll bring him back home. That's what we do. So that piece of trying to figure out, how to transport this patient, how are they going to transfer, how do I manage this, that, or the other? You don't have to worry about that. Like, we take care of that piece for these patients. And that's one of the beautiful things about the program, because we know, working in other sectors of healthcare, like, that's not common practice. And to be able to provide that, especially for someone who doesn't have their own transportation and trying to navigate, we've had a patient who we worked on using public transportation with, because that was his mode of getting around. So, being sure that he could find out the appropriate route that he needed to take on the bus system, what bus numbers to get on it, what place were we getting off, where, how are we getting from point A to point B with different things. If we're going shopping, we need to take these buses. If we're going to this position, we need to take these buses. What is the schedule like? How early do I need to leave to get to that, bus so that I get to my appointment on time? So it is really a melting pot of services when you look at it, when you're talking about the breakdown and just the cognitive process of it. And then you're talking about a patient who's had a brain injury on top, right? So, we're really working through some very dynamic situations and unique situations with a lot of these patients. And you just see the progress that they make. It's astounding. Like, it really is, to be able to see, going from not being able to do really anything, and now they've become so functional. And I think the reward behind the services speaks for itself. We're always talking about form equaling function and driving outcomes. The outcomes are driven by how well we're able to track that. Well, we use the MPAI, the Mayo Portland Adaptability Index. So we're able to really measure it on a functional standpoint and see our patients go from here to here. You want that score trending down, because that means that they're becoming more self-sufficient. They are able to better manage and adapt in their environment when that score trends down. And that shows the progress. And it shows how therapy has been a tremendous impact in that person's life.
Yeah, wow. I'm kind of blown away. Sounds like my dream.
Come on and join us. We're always looking for great help.
Well, and thinking about referrals, and again, it's not really off topic because I think we can always tie it back in. But one of the things that used to drive me crazy in acute care was when we would get consults on patients who are actively withdrawing from either alcohol abuse or a like polysubstance abuse, and they're in the hospital, they're withdrawing, and we would get this cognitive eval or sometimes a swallowing eval in a patient who's actively withdrawing and really not yet appropriate because they can't even keep their eyes open for 27 seconds. And thinking about, one of the things I used to say to the case managers was, why are we only offering skilled nursing for people who are, yes, they have a substance abuse problem, but they're going to go back home and go back to work? Why are we not offering a substance abuse center or program that maybe isn't even an outpatient? And so to hear that this exists, it's not the same as that, but my mindset is working in that same realm of, these kinds of things are not talked about often enough. What we typically hear is that our patients with traumatic brain injuries go home and they don't have access to services, particularly the ones who don't have an obvious physical disability where they're just up walking around and they, look, as people will say, they look normal. But what does normal look like?
Exactly.
So to see that there is something like that exists.
And most of our patients look normal, I should say. They're very high level balance issues. They are, those patients who are trying to get back to hunting, fishing, whatever it is that they're doing, skeet shooting. I mean, you just take your pick. So they may be able to do those basic ADL tasks, but when you start talking very specific recreational activities, that return to work, those more high level things, those are things that our therapists are focusing on with those patients. They are identifying the deficits that, as someone who's not trained in that, you say, oh, they're fine. They can do whatever, they're fine. But when we go in and we look at those patients, we are going in with a different perspective, because we're taking into account, what does life look like for them? Not only when they're going to work, but when they're at home, when they're participating in their recreational activities, because that's a big part of most people's lives. Like your neighbor who's 80, I'm sure golf is probably consuming him at this point, because he really doesn't have anything else going on. He's not working anymore. He's retired, family life is good. But we know golfers, like, they're on the golf course just about all day. They come off for the evening, have dinner, relax, and they're back out there that next morning, So talking about someone like that, what is their endurance like? You go out and you do a 30-minute golfing session and you say, oh, they're fine. But 2 hours in, they're starting to fatigue and their balance starts to sway. Those are the things that we're looking at. And we're able to do that because we have extended durations of treatment time. So when I say 6 hours, that 6 hours can be allocated however the therapist and the patient deem appropriate. So they may get 1 session a week, they may get 3 sessions a week. It is very patient specific, depending on what their needs, what the demands are. And that's what we have started to cater to when we're talking about this patient population. We are really customizing what the treatment plan looks like. It's not cookie cutter. It's not going to look the same from one patient to another, because everyone's need is different. And when I say that, I know, we've heard that for so long in therapy world, but then we look at the goals for 5 patients and they all look the same, right? Maybe an adjustment here or there. This is truly customized, because Mr. Jack over here likes to play golf and Mr. Jones might like to play basketball. At 80 years, he's been a 3-point shooter, a dribbler, he likes to do layups and he likes to do suicides. That's going to be very different tasks from Mr. Jones, who's over here swinging his golf clubs, and he's picking out which golf club he's going to use and which head, and how heavy is that 9-iron that he's using, and what hole are we going for, and how many holes are on this golf course. So those are the things that we're looking at with these patients and customizing, and that's the difference.
Well, and the funny thing is this, like you said, this company's been around for quite some time, but I know, when my dad had a stroke, that was back in 97. and as the young people would say, in the 1900s. But when he had his stroke and he got healthy enough to go to inpatient rehab, one of the things that they still did back then was community outings. And so community outings for him were a challenge because he had so many deficits. He had dysphagia, aphasia, he had right hemianopsia, he had some right neglect as well. So he had a lot going on. So to take him out in the community when he got home, if we hadn't had that, oh my gosh, I don't think I could have I was in my mid-20s. I don't think I could have taken him out on my own because they took him to, back when malls were still a thing, when it was like you go into the mall and you could walk around the various stores, and their big thing was going to Chick-fil-A, and they had to order their own lunch. So he had some script training and stuff like that to prepare him for that. But even still, like early on, again, when I worked in inpatient rehab, I remember those were some of the things that we did, was like having the patient make a phone call to their physician to let them know what had happened, or having them try to set up their follow-up appointment for the PCP. Even though technically the case managers did that, they could always, they're about to discharge home, we could have them call the doctor's office and verify that their appointment date and time was correct. So those things kind of got brushed by the wayside when all these insurance changes happened, so I was used to doing those things, and then I became told I couldn't, and that's one of the things that really just made me so angry, because back then our average length of stay was like, for a stroke patient, was 3 to 4 weeks. Now it's like 7 days, maybe 5, depending on where you're at and depending on what your insurance looks like. That's insane.
And we get some of those that have only had 7 days of, an inpatient rehab stay, and then they go home. And, luckily for us, we tend to get 8 to 10 weeks, depending on their payer source. So if you think about that, that's a lot of intensive therapy, 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah, for 6 hours a week.
Are you taking advantage of our new amazing feature? The certificate tracker. The free CE tracker allows you to keep track of all of your CEUs, whether they are earned with us at speechtherapypd.com or through another provider. Simply upload your certificate to your registered account and you're all set. So come join the fastest growing CE provider, speechtherapypd.com.
Exactly. So you talk about scripts where, we do the little role playing with ordering a meal or groceries or calling a doctor's office, but we're actually going to these appointments with patients. We're driving them there. We're seeing, how do you sign in for your appointment? What are the barriers that are presented? Are you able to pay your copay? Are you able to provide them with your insurance card and your driver's license or whatever, form of ID that they're asking you for? Are you able to answer the questions appropriately? And, all of these things that we have done in role-playing scenarios, we're able to actually act them out and see them through with patients, which is so beneficial, because then you take it back and you review everything and you say, okay, well, this happened, that happened, how do we do in this situation? How can we make it better? That's that therapy process that we go through initially, right? That we've had to kind of abandon over the years because, just as you stated, because of insurance regulations not really affording us the opportunity to provide that. And that's the beauty of the services that we provide, because now we can go back to more of that model where we're able to provide more functional rehabilitation that's going to actually be beneficial to the patient.
Yeah. Well, and also it kind of reminds me, like when you were talking about the models in California and Colorado and Texas, primarily at the, I'm thinking probably now too, but probably at the time that they were implemented, being more kind of geared towards veterans. When I'm thinking this was kind of before my time really as an SLP, but thinking about how we would hear patients that were coming back from blast injuries in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how they would come back and they, again, looked normal, but they would get called, their injury would get called a mild concussion, when in actuality, they've had multiple concussions over years of service. And it's really not a mild concussion at this point. It's truly a real TBI or multiple TBIs. and they look physically okay, but then they go to do things like pick their kid up from school or drive them to their sports practice or even go to their local grocery store, and they get in the car. And one, I would always question that because of balance,
You're
but
right.
also executive functioning, being able to get from point A to point B while not only remembering what it is you were supposed to be doing, how to get there, how to navigate back home, but also like all the things that are stimulating.
Those distractions.
Yeah, light, sound.
Even people you see someone and they know you've sustained an injury and they say, hey, how are you doing? I'm glad you're home. I know you're in the hospital for a while, yada, yada, yada. And you have this side conversation for 10 minutes and then the conversation ends. And then are they able to even recall what they were doing in the midst of all that? Are they able to resume that activity and complete it efficiently? Or are they like, okay, now I don't remember what I was here for. I'll just go back home. And then this process starts all over again. So that's the beauty of what we do. We're able to assess those patients live and be able to make adjustments, suggestions, and really it's really nice. And you did bring up one thing too. You mentioned, veterans. We also work with the VA. So if you're talking about a VA patient that, like you said, has had multiple brain injuries over time from concussions, we are able to work with those folks because we see just what you said. They've had small incidences over time that are now adding up and leading to what is now a TBI, but they appear to be functional when you look at the outside, but when you start breaking down those little minute tasks, now they're not. And a good example, just like you said, is being able to pick up a child. Children are very active. Are you able to run and keep up with them? How old is said child? Are we talking about a 2-year-old or are we talking about a 7-year-old? Because there's a big difference, being able to listen, follow instructions, or are we just going to take off and run? And then if you attempt to run after them, what does that look like? So those are some very good points to bring forward, and definitely things that we address in our therapy, just really that dynamic balance and being able to adapt in those different situations. Are they capable of doing it, or does someone need to be present to assist with supervision? Can they be left alone with their children? What does that look like? Because we know the financial impact that can happen when you start talking about, someone who's suffered a brain injury, especially if they were the breadwinner. Maybe, maybe it's dad and he sustained a brain injury on the job and now he's not able to work. So mom, who never worked before, is now outside of the home seeking employment, and she has a job, but they also have a 2-year-old. Dad is functional at home by himself, but now we're asking him to take on added responsibility of taking care of the 2-year-old, so mom can go out of the home to make money to support them. What does that look like if dad is home with that 2-year-old by himself? Is that even a possibility? So those are some things that we can assess and really work through with patients and families.
Yeah, and that brings to mind a patient I had. It was last year before I left outpatient. He was not much older than me, and he was coming home one night after going out to dinner. And he's not someone. He actually appeared much younger, very physically fit. Like he's very into fitness, and he's not someone who drinks or anything like that. He's never been, in his words, never been a substance user. Very healthy, very fit, and he was coming home and he got rear-ended at a high speed when he was stopped at a stoplight. And of course, being an African-American male, the first thing that the first responders thought he was under the influence and gave him Narcan at the scene with a TBI. So that was like, I'm already speechless, like on day one of the eval, because I want to apologize for people not thinking through, because he wasn't unconscious. He was just stunned at the moment of the brain injury and unable to answer their questions at rapid fire. Like, what's your name? What's your birthday? Where are you from? He's like, I don't know. I just got in a car accident. But one of the things that was really disheartening with his case was that he worked as a mechanic, and he had a lot of certifications for what he did. He works for a pretty large dealership in our area. that's like a brand name dealership, not like a mom and pop owned shop. But anyway, he was a veteran. He only had, in his words again, he said, I only had 8 years of service. And I'm like, well, that's not only, that's a lot.
Right.
So he had always had access to VA, and being so healthy, he chose not to, and not having dependents at home, he just chose not to carry health insurance on a regular basis because he had access to the VA. So when he got this TBI, he goes home after very minimal care, and he's able to come to outpatient, but his copay is something like $85 per visit. PT discharged him pretty quickly because his balance issues to them weren't worth them charging him for. Don't make me roll my eyes. And then OT, he didn't really have a need for OT because fine motor wise, he was good. But what wound up happening was he was having I'm full circling this back to what you said about having a 2-year-old. So what wound up happening that really scared him was being a male who lived alone. He had a fiance, but they weren't cohabitating. He cooked meals. He had grandchildren that were under the age of 5 or 6 who would come sometimes and either spend the night or spend a weekend or even just spend the day with him. And so he was responsible for their meals as well. And so what wound up happening was there were several, not just one, several times that he left burners on the stove on with food in them and had like little small fires, or just burnt the pan up and was like one step away from a small fire, but he could smell it and then realized. So he was interesting. He sort of developed his self system of putting Post-it notes to try to prompt him to turn off the burner. But then it also turned into difficulty remembering to take his medications. And he wasn't on a lot of medication, but the medications he was on were supposed to be routine for him to minimize the headache that he was having from the TBI and the photophobia that he had. So it's so interesting when I meet people that always put these things in a box and they think it's this one thing, and they don't realize how cyclical everything impacts the other thing, impacts this thing, now is impacting this thing. And it's the reason why we do what we do and why it's so important, because it's not just an isolated incident here that doesn't impact, him not taking his meds could impact his grandkids coming over.
Right. And then that's why it's important for the interdisciplinary approach, because you get the patient, you get the family, you get all of the therapists and physician or whoever is involved in their care together and go over things with the family, such as, he should not be left for extended periods of time by himself. We need some external memory aids in place that are going to assist with him being able to recall, or do we need to look at, is he even capable of preparing meals at this time? Or do we need to find an alternative method? So what does that look like? And being able to find and allocate the resources is really a big part of what our social workers do. They do such a phenomenal job with being able to set patients up with, meals on wheels. People don't even realize that it's still available.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to access it. So just being something that simple that we're able to set them up with, or where can you go to get free, dental supplies or personal hygiene products, etc., because your funds are limited, because now you're on a set income, whereas before you were someone who worked triple overtime every pay period because you were able to, and now you're no longer able to do that, but your family is still dependent on that paycheck. So how can we find ways to save money to actually use our dollars that we have for the things we need, and then rely on other resources to provide and supplement, so those are things that our social workers do. Do we need outside resources? What do those outside resources look like? Because you mentioned him having no insurance because he was under the VA, and we know with the VA, you have to go back to the VA to get those services until they refer you out. So what does that process look like? And is that process speedy enough for that patient, or do we need to look at a marketplace plan? Okay, so we look at a marketplace plan. What does that marketplace plan look like? What type of funds do I need to allocate towards that, or do I? Because in certain states, they have grant programs and you can get a marketplace plan and pay nothing for it, but people don't know that. So it's a matter of having access to resources that can set you up with the necessary resources for you to have what you need in order to live a productive and healthy life post-brain injury.
Yeah, and that you brought up a great point that it's not very well known. These programs are not very well known. And I know when, again, working in different settings, having someone who actually knows about these programs is really valuable. But a lot of times what happens is, much like a lot of other roles in healthcare, those folks that do know don't stick around because of burnout or because they, don't feel like their pay is not adequate to what their work is, and their work-life balance is suffering. And so they move on to something else. So a lot of those resources are sort of lost in the wind if you don't know about it from having that personal experience.
Absolutely.
And then the other thing is that, particularly back for the VA, that wait list time, I'm also we've got 5 military bases within less than 50 miles from me and where I live. And it's the wait time is nuts. They're starting to build more of a community-based, smaller scale model hospital. There's a very large hospital in Hampton, over by Hampton University. There's a very large VA hospital that serves this whole geographic region all the way up to the next one's in Richmond, which is an hour and a half away. But they've started finally building these smaller little satellite outpatient medical type facilities, but they're in the process of being built. So like there's one 45 minutes from me, but I'm 20 minutes from the naval base. I'm 30 minutes from the Air Force base. I'm 45 minutes from the Army base. And I could keep going from there. You've got Coast Guard in the neighboring town. We've got Marines out in Virginia Beach. So there's a lot of people, and a lot of people that are retired or, medically separated, or just separated because they decided to leave, but they still have access to VA care. So I said this last week when I was doing a talk about social determinants of health and caregiving. The healthcare system is so broken already, and we have all these other things that compound it. And so now to find out that this type of program exists, how do we kind of get behind this and push for more? That's the whole, I think, advocacy piece I was talking about, because our legislators typically want to know. They don't have the time and the space to be able to know every single thing there is to know about every single nuanced program in the state.
Right.
So that's another thing I think would be a really great way to figure out how can we push for more stuff like this. And then partnering with, do you all partner with any of the community-based things? Does Georgia have a brain injury association? I'm sure they do.
We do. I'm actually going to forward you some resources to share, but
okay.
We do have brain injury association in Georgia. And so so as case manager, I'm responsible for not only, being the facilitator between the patients, the families, case managers for these patients outside of our system, but I also allocate resources. Some of them come from my social workers, some of them come from my therapists, and some of it is my own, grunt work to find the resources for our patients. So we have multiple platforms that we use to find these resources for them in whatever area they're in, because it's going to vary, even within states. What do you have access to? What is closest to you? So we do find these resources and we share them with our patients and families to arm them with the tools to be successful, because that's key. Like you said before, a lot of times people don't even know that the resources are out there, let alone how to access it. So we provide not only, hey, this is the resource, but this is how you go about getting said resource. So we do try to set our patients up with success, and then they always have our contact information. They're more than welcome to always reach back out to us so that we can help bridge any gaps in between that may occur and help them be as successful as possible post therapy process with us, because a lot of times once you're done in a division of therapy, that's it. You no longer really have access to that. For us, we keep those lines open. We do 3 month, we do 6 month, 9 month, and 12-month follow-ups to see,
Wow, yeah.
what's going on, what's different, is there anything that we can do to help? What does it look like? Because we like to track those trends and see. And again, that's why I said we're data driven. We like to be able to see, okay, we discharged you, were here, are you still there? Are you somewhere else? Have you regressed any? Or have you actually progressed more? What does that look like for you? What is your quality of life like? So we collect demographic information as well as, their supervision information, so we know how they're functioning post rehab. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, like, even so, at what point do you all start in the acute phase, or do you start later after a skilled nursing, or do you start after like inpatient, or does it just vary from patient to patient?
As far as when we start providing intervention?
Yeah, because I'm thinking about, like, for outpatient, sometimes I'd get a TBI patient, again, who looked normal to the physician, but they would they would authorize or request for their referral 3 to 4 visits.
Mm,
3 to
okay.
4 visits, like, I just got done with my eval. What are you what are you talking about? Because it's hard to do a complete eval in 45 minutes.
Right.
So, is this more of an end of the road after all this other therapy options have been exhausted, or do you start earlier? Because you mentioned early intervention before.
So it can be earlier, because are we talking about just the home and community piece? Are we talking about Collage Rehabilitation Partners as a whole? Because we have our post-acute step-down unit. So those patients who go into our community-based settings, then a lot of times they may be referred to us once they come out of that, depending on their geographic location and proximity to us, and if we have a team available in their area. It may be that they're coming. Maybe so. Recently, we had a patient who went from the hospital, discharged to a subacute rehab facility, was only there for 7 days, and then went home. So then we got the referral. Now, the referral had been in the hopper ever since the hospital stay. However, because of how that system works, going through each little source, by the time the patient discharged home and we got everything, we were ready to start, the patient had been at home probably a month before we were able to actually start providing the intervention. So it just really depends on how quickly the pieces of paper move and we're able to get the ball rolling. For some, it's pretty much the next day, if not the same day that they come home, that we're able to move it along. And I think sometimes a lot of that is dependent upon how long they anticipate them being in one setting before they're ready to transition to us, and if they misjudge it or things happen to transpire in a different way than what they anticipated, and now they're having to try and expedite the process. So it really can look different, but we're usually brought on board and start our pre-screening very early on in the process. We have a patient now that, gosh, I think we've been looking at for about 7 months that we're waiting to discharge home, and I think we'll go home either later this month or first of next month, that we've been just kind of waiting to get to the point where they get home, and then we can come in and start with our home and community-based services. So yeah, it looks different for everybody.
Yeah, because even in outpatient, there was times where I would have a TBI patient that was solely an acute care stay, and maybe their injury occurred back in February, and I wouldn't even get them in my office until mid-April. So it was, anywhere from sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 4 months. So even thinking that a month sounds like a long time, if you're working in the field and the traditional models, that that's not a long time, because even to get in from, say you went skilled nursing first as a patient from acute care, and then before you could do your inpatient rehab stay, that sometimes there's a gap there too, being able to access that service, and you wind up sitting there waiting. So yeah, it's just, I'm like kind of blown away that I didn't know this existed. I'm very excited about this because it changes things so significantly for so many of our patients. And then thinking about like, you mentioned several different services, but do you all do like any kind of support group offerings for like families or caregivers?
So we don't offer support groups directly, but that's one of the resources that I do provide. So I usually locate and provide them with a support group in their area. Most of those are run by the Brain Injury Association in the state. So unless there's some other ones that I just happen to find, that's the main one that I provide as well. So yeah, if you're going to start up a brain injury group, let me know, because we'd love to be able to add them. If we hear of any of the local hospitals that are providing that service as well, or outpatient or private practices, then we share that as well. So yeah, if you are heading up a brain injury support group, share that information with me. I'd love to be able to provide it to our patients upon discharge as a resource, because so many of them and their families need that.
Yeah, definitely. And they're few and far between. And even like just thinking about going back to people who are younger patients with TBI who have kids or other family that they're responsible for their care, because now we have the sandwich generation of people who are parents taking care of their own children, and then their parents or grandparents or other, aunt, uncle, loved one, they're responsible for also taking care of them. So what if that happens, they get a TBI, and now they've got this both geriatric people they're responsible for, and then their younger children. So again, it's such a huge community need, and wow. Yeah.
It is. And we know that caregivers tend to not take care of themselves because they're busy taking care of everyone else. So really being able to drive home the importance of taking care of themselves in the midst of taking care of everyone else, because we've seen it time and time again. I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it in rehab. The caregiver becomes the one who's being taken care of, because they drove themselves into the ground trying to make sure everyone else was taken care of, and they forgot to take their medications or go to their doctor's appointments, or whatever the case may be. And it's a really sad situation when you see that happen. And I know we like to say it, but really have to practice it, of taking care of yourself while taking care of others.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that has to be something big and grand, but a lot of times it's just having 10 minutes to yourself. And it's interesting because I have a patient right now who, she was born with CP, but she had a TBI during another incident. And her mom was saying, because she was trying to get her into a community day support program, her mom was saying, I just need 5 minutes, because she has younger children she's also caring for, plus an older daughter who's moved back home, who has a baby. So she's like, I just need 5 minutes. I'm caring for my other children, but I have a child with special needs and is, different abilities from my other kids. And now I have a grandbaby that I'm also helping take care of at home. And it's been she's doing the best she can. And she's really, her questions are very thoughtful, and she tries really hard, but that's a tough space to be in. And for her to be able to ask those questions, but also be able to acknowledge, literally just need 5 minutes. Like, I need to be able to go to the bathroom without someone knocking on the door. And for those listeners who have small, tiny humans at home, that it does come eventually that you can go to the bathroom and your kids aren't knocking on the door anymore to ask you a question.
And sometimes it's as simple as just, having a problem solving session with someone who's a neutral party. How can we reshape this process? What does it look like? And I always stress to my patients, young and old, schedules and routines help a lot, especially for caregiver burnout. You set a schedule, you get everybody adjusted to that routine, and you stick to it, because it will make or break your life if you don't have a schedule and a routine. And I understand that every day may not run on schedule, but attempt to get as close to it as possible, because it is so beneficial to be able to say everybody's going to be down in the bed, fed, fast by 8 o'clock, and from 8 to 9 I can sleep, or I can get up from 5 to 6 a.m. and I can have prayer and coffee, and just the little things. It's the little things. Like you say, we're going to put a sign on the door. We're going to put red on one side. That means stop, don't enter, do not pass this point. Or green on the other side, which means it's okay, come on in. But if you need that 10 minutes for your shower to yourself, flip it to red. And they know when it's on red, don't come in, So it's just simple things that you can help people process and problem solve through that sometimes we just don't think about.
Yeah, or you feel guilty. We see that a lot too with caregivers, particularly of TBI patients, again, because they're trying so hard to manage this person that needs the help, but then they're also like feeling guilty that they're not doing enough and they haven't maybe stepped up in the ways that they feel like they should have. I mean, how many times in therapy have you heard the caregiver say, oh my gosh, I should have known that. I should have known not to talk over them or to talk for them. I should have known to slow down and be a better listener.
And I think the key
we've all heard that.
Just said therapy, right? So mental health professionals involved. And it's okay to have therapists. It's okay. I know it's been taboo in our communities for so long. Oh my gosh, you're seeing a therapist? Yes, I'm seeing a therapist. And I thoroughly enjoy my time with my therapist. It's important. And it's not only important as an individual, but as a family. Sometimes you need that because then you don't take things personally. You learn how to shape and take things into perspective for what it is that you and yours need at that moment in time. And it does not look the same for everybody. And getting them to understand that, and having that neutral third party can really be beneficial to the process, teaching them to not take things personal. It's okay to say, I get 5 minutes to myself. Okay. And it's okay you didn't catch everything. It's okay. Sometimes people just need that reassurance that the decisions they made were appropriate, and sometimes things are just going to happen. There's nothing we can do about it.
And it's okay to say no.
Exactly. That's a hard one for a lot of people, saying no.
Yes. Definitely hard one.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Sonya, for joining us. I always appreciate chats with you, and this is just so eye-opening for me. So I'm excited to see the resources that you share and kind of follow up on that some more. But again, I thank you so much for being here and look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete address in your account profile prior to the course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to be reflected on your ASHA transcript. Each episode comes with an accompanying course on speechtherapypd.com, available for a 0.1 ASHA CEU. And just for our listeners, get $20 off any subscription with promo code BRAINSTORMS20. SpeechTherapyPD.com is run by SLPs for SLPs. We've got the largest library of ASHA CEU eligible courses out there, adding fresh content every week. Remember, use Brainstorms20 to get $20 off access to over 1,000 courses for an entire year. Head over to SpeechTherapyPD.com for more information and start earning CEs today. Thanks for tuning in to Brainstorms, Functional Neuro Rehab for SLPs. And don't forget, SpeechTherapyPD.com is your go-to for all things ASHA CEUs. Your positive reviews and support mean the world to us. We'd love for you to drop us a quick review and hit that follow button.